You're watching the One Fish Comms webinar series, Friction Free. I'm your host, Carrie Benningfield, and in this series we talk about how to remove the barriers in the way of great people doing a fantastic job at work. With me today is GP and founder of Wild Monday, Rachel Morris. Welcome.
Hi Carrie, thank you for having me.
Rachel saw hundreds of patients in the general practitioner setting, experiencing stress and needing time off work. And she realised that there was a huge job of work to be done, combining what she knew from her clinical medical training and what she understood about the workplace to try and head off some of those issues at source. And I invited Rachel today to talk about removing friction. So in the past, we might have considered driving up performance as our key lever at work, our key people lever. So trying to get more and more and more and more out of our people. Now we're flipping that. So we are exploring how we can take away some of the barriers in the way of the people we've hired, the great people that we have in the organisation doing their best work. And one of those is the lack of productivity that comes from stress. So Rachel, stress is not something we can get away from completely, is it?
No, I mean, I think stress is inevitable, and actually the stress response is a normal response. It's been hardwired into us from when we were living in caves. It's actually a very protective thing. It helps keep us safe, keep our babies safe, stop the alpha male from clashing with us, making sure we're not in the we're not outcast from the group. So we have this sort of threat detection system, which when it's constantly activated will lead to stress. And I think in today's workplace, our stress response activation system, which is the amygdala in the brain, it is just activated sort of all the time. And I guess in today's workplace, which is obviously volatile and uncertain and stuff, we're being required to do more and more with less and less quite often, which can be quite a stressful place to be in. So I think even just a normal workplace, even if you don't have the layers of uncertainty and stuff, can set off our threat detection system and be quite stressful for us.
And you mentioned the amygdala. So tell us a bit more about what's the amygdala and what's going on in our brain.
Yeah, so in our brains, we've got this tiny little spot in the middle called the amygdala. And like I said, it's the threat detection system, and that's responsible for our fight or our flight or our freeze response. And it saves our lives. It stops us stepping in front of buses. It keeps us from falling off the top of mountains, etc. It detects danger. And it was really, really helpful when we were living in caves. But the problem is we don't have the same level of danger around us these days. And it ends up detecting and putting layers of understanding on things that perhaps aren't there. So if you have a difficult email, you might respond in exactly the same way as if a bear had just sort of reared its ugly head. So chronic stress actually makes the amygdala bigger. It sets off a hormone called cortisol. It increases the circulating cortisol. That makes the amygdala bigger. We then become more reactive and less able to sort of think rationally, because when the amygdala is activated, like I said, fight, flight or freeze, 3 responses, very black and white, and then it's very difficult to think creatively and think outside of the box.
So I think we can probably all relate to that feeling of overwhelm at work, and also there's that feeling that everybody else is coping and for some reason I'm not. So what is it about stress at work that can be quite isolating?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that we think no one else is experiencing it, or no one's saying that they're experiencing it, or even if people are experiencing it, what they tend to do is put the blinkers on, hunker down and get on with their own work and aren't so collaborative and don't pay so much attention to people around them. And I see this in general practice all the time, that people are the GPs that are working are so overwhelmed with work that they all, even though they know other people are as well, almost to notice is to acknowledge the problem would mean they then have to help, which will then make their work even greater, which will mean they maybe have to take some shifts off them or do an on-call or see some extra patients. And if they're already at max, the thought of having to be a a decent human being and help someone else is almost a little bit too much. So I think we almost blind ourselves to other people's stress because we don't want to acknowledge it, because it makes our own jobs harder and harder.
And that doesn't sound great for teamwork.
No, it's not great for teamwork. And I think sometimes we have this mindset of, well, I just got on and did it, so they just need to get on and do it. Or sometimes, you know, you might see someone and you think, well, why did they take on that project? That was stupid. You know, they knew it was one step too many. So there's something about, sometimes the feeling is that people do it to themselves, so they just need to get on with it, which I guess isn't helpful for teamwork. And also, I think we sometimes have this idea that to be stressed is somehow a human weakness or a failing. And so we don't want to admit it, because it seems not to be coping means that we're not very resilient, and therefore we're a bit weak or something like that. So I think there's all these reasons why we either hide it in ourselves or we ignore it in other people, and we're not vulnerable, and we're not talking to each other about it.
So let's look at this through a couple of different lenses. Firstly, through the lens of the manager. So you have a team, you're not a wellbeing expert, you're not in HR, but you have a team of people who are clearly feeling overworked, probably due to something going on beyond the team, beyond the boundaries of the team, changes in the organisation and so on. And you yourself are feeling pretty overworked and overwhelmed. What sorts of things should that manager be thinking about to help them figure out what to do with a whole load of overwhelmed people when they themselves are feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's a really, really tricky one. And I think it's such a common thing, because I think the minute other people feel overwhelmed, the manager's initial reaction is often to take work off them and to rescue them, to say, okay, you're overwhelmed, I'll do it for you. But that creates all sorts of other problems, because then they're not available for one-to-ones. They're then completely overloaded and just not available to the team. So I think there are several things managers can do which would help. First is just to recognise it and recognise really early signs of stress, because we talk a lot about being able to detect stress early and getting people to seek help. But the people who are in the best position to detect stress, well, firstly is your own colleagues, your own peers. They sit next to you every day, probably, and can notice you sort of weeping into your lunch. But the managers will start to notice little things like people staying just a bit longer than they used to at work, or people just starting to miss deadlines, or maybe those short responses to emails, or the sort of immediate, I can't possibly do that. So I think managers firstly need to pick up on the early signs and then have conversations about it. So in my experience, managers are really nervous about having conversations with their teams about their level of stress and the level of well-being. And I've sort of been pondering why this is. I think there's a few reasons. I think first of all, they don't think they can, because the other person might take that as a form of criticism of them. Because if you say, oh, I've noticed that you're a bit stressed right now, like, no, I'm not stressed, I'm coping with my job fine, you know. So it sets up a difficult conversation and some conflict sometimes. And another reason is that I think managers sometimes feel that it's not their place to be talking to someone about their stress, particularly if the stress is going on at home, or it's a personal thing, or it's a personal well-being issue, because the managers think, well, it's not my jurisdiction, it's nothing to do with work, therefore I can't go there. And I think managers also sometimes just feel that they haven't got the skills or the tools to be able to do that. You know, if I start to talk to someone about their well-being and their health, well, I'm not a qualified medical professional, then I can't give any advice, so I can't have that conversation.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of reasons why they don't address it, even though it's blatantly obvious it's something bad that's going on.
And so what could they do?
I think one of the first things, you know, just the simple human thing is, how are you, you know, really, and actually properly want to know. So the very simple things of going out for a coffee with someone and taking it outside the very formal work environments, even at work, you know, go to the cafe, have an informal chat. So I think some things will come up a lot easier informally than if it's with an official one-to-one. They can, something that's been useful for some of the teams I've worked with, they've actually used the stress performance curve, which is a very simple curve, the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which you just Google that, you'll find it. And it basically shows that with increasing pressure, people perform better, but you reach a certain amount of pressure and your performance just tips off. And so a really easy start to a conversation about how stressed or overwhelmed someone is just say, where would you put yourself on this curve? Where would you rate yourself? I'm just doing a survey just to check. And then if people have self-rated themselves, well, I'm just starting to tip over, I'm just starting to get a little bit stressed about stuff, then they've admitted it to you and they've told you, and then that just opens up all sorts of conversations. I'm like, okay, what's the reason for that? What's causing that? And then you and what would help tip you back just to your peak performance here. So using tools such as that, I think, can be really helpful.
How do you get over the chatter in your own mind that says, well, they should be coping. I coped when I had to do that job, or the stories we tell ourselves about other people, which perhaps are stories about ourselves, really.
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think. I think it's by seeing somebody rather than as a helpless victim, by saying, rather than they're helpless, they should just know how to do it. We've all got to do it. This is ridiculous. To seeing them as actually, they have lots of resources, they have lots of capability, and they actually have the potential to be able to do it. But at the moment, the reality is they're in a space where they're not really coping. And my job as a manager is to get them help. Not, I can't get them, but I can help them help themselves get to that place where they are starting to cope again. And then there's all sorts of things going on. And I like when you say, the story in my head, because I think that's something that I think is one of the most powerful things to think about. What's the story in my head going on? And actually, you can even write that down, that they should be coping, that everyone's a bit stressed. Okay. Is that the truth? Firstly, are they not coping? Because they might be coping, but this is their way of coping, is to just like emote a bit and do a bit of whinging. Maybe that is their way of coping. But what's the truth for them? What is actually going on for them? Because there's probably loads of stuff under the surface that you haven't even come close to.
And what if they have, what you mentioned, emoting and kind of whinging and so on, and often people will whinge about things that you have as a manager have very little control over, and that can get pretty wearing and kind of drain your own resources for coping and colour your ability to be empathetic and to have their best interests at heart. So how do we cope with whinging?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think it's down to the conversations that we're having and the quality of the conversations that we're having. I think if someone is doing a lot of whinging and bringing the team down, then you could give them some very straightforward feedback. Like I've noticed that you've been saying some things, been expressing your dissatisfaction with stuff, and I've noticed that the impact on the team has been that it's sort of spread a bit. But I really like to understand what's going on. What's going on for you? Is there anything that's particularly bothering you? Is there anything that I could help you with? Is there anything that you could help yourself with? Again, it's about not blaming people, not making people feel bad or shaming them, but just actually calling it out and saying, this is what I've noticed. And I think here we need to stop taking things so personally. Because I think certainly with my team, if any whinging goes on, I automatically assume it's a direct criticism of me. So the story in my head is like, oh, they're whinging. I've not been a good enough manager. I've not been clear enough about them. I've not, I'm bad. I'm rubbish. And then when I start to feel like that, we're back to the old amygdala. Amygdala fires up, detects a threat to me, and I start to get cross and angry, and my chimp comes out. So for those people that have read the chimp paradox, Dr. Steve Peters describes this sort of reaction as your chimp coming out. So my chimp comes out. I start thinking, well, that person's really bad. How dare they criticize me? And actually what might be happening for them is they're just a bit overwhelmed. They've got all sorts of stuff going on at home. The company's made a few policy decisions they don't really agree with. And this is the only way they've got of airing it. So the more I can understand what's going on in their head, probably the less likely I am to take all this whinging really personally. And then perhaps we can sit down, work out what we can actually do something about together, and what are those things that are actually completely outside our control. And we can just look at it together and go, yeah, that's a bit crap. That's a bit rubbish. How are we going to move forward? How are we going to live with it and do our jobs, even though we can't change it?
So it sounds like there's a piece around opening up conversation. So when time is short and everybody's stressed, the last thing you feel you've got time to do is go and have a cup of coffee with people in a quality conversation. But actually, that's the investment of 25 minutes to properly hear somebody out pays back, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so, because I think people just want to be heard. They want to be treated like a human being. And I think the thing that stops a lot of people doing that as managers is the thought that I've got to fix it. If I go for coffee with them and they tell me all their issues, I can't fix it. So it's better just not to talk about it. But then again, what you need to be able to do is step out of that rescuer role, step out of the I've got to fix everything from this person role, and step into more of a coach role. So listening, what's really going on with you? How can we work together? How can I ask the right questions? How can I empower this person to fix it themselves?
Yeah. So now let's have a look from the organisational point of view. So I know that One Fish, Two Fish works with lots of organisations who are trying to shift into a high trust, high performance without burnout culture. And that one of the things that really stands in the way of doing that. So for example, when we encourage people to do fast experiments rather than great big project plans that sort of attempt to plan away any risk or uncertainty. The problem with getting people to try and do experiments is firstly they are worried about the risk and failure, but secondly they're too busy, they're too stressed, they're too busy, they're too overwhelmed with their current day job to do even a small extra thing, let alone take something that they would perceive to be risky. So as an organisation, talk to me about what organisations could be doing to remove the friction and get rid of the lack of productivity and the lack of willingness to experiment that comes from ongoing overwhelm.
Yeah, this is a really tricky problem, and I think that when people are overwhelmed with work, they get hunkered down into the fight or flight thing, and all they can think about is that urgent stuff right in front of them. And I think if you've got 20 things to do by the end of the day, and then someone's asking you to be really creative and do this amazing project that you might fail at, well, I'm going to focus on that 20 things that I've got to do, because if they don't get done, I'm judge. And yes, there's this other thing that's quite risky. I think you need to be in a creative space to do the risky thing that you might fail at, and that's very hard to do when you're then overwhelmed with all the rest of the stuff. So I think the one thing that organisations can do is help their employees to really prioritise what they need to do. So that's a bit of time management stuff. That's helping them maybe map out all the urgent stuff they've got and all the important stuff that maybe not urgent. And that's one thing where managers can then sit down and go, okay, your things that you really need today, the priorities for today are this, this, and this. And if they want them to do this interesting project that's a bit risky, then they actually need to say, and these can wait.
Yeah.
Or block out time for you to do this with project. Here's a day, all your meetings are going to be cancelled for this day. We're going to turn your emails off. You're going to get into a creative space, and that's when you can do it. Because when you're in the overwhelmed fight or flight zone, you can't be. It's very difficult to be creative. And that's a really interesting theory of sort of well-being I was reading about, called the broaden and build theory. That when we've got adrenaline coursing and we've got our amygdalas activated, you can't broaden and build. You can't go, oh, that's interesting, and how can I do that, and how can I get into another mindset. So I think that's one thing, is actually just sort of, because a lot of the urgent stuff isn't actually that urgent. It seems urgent to us at the time, but sometimes it's sort of reporting back to people just because they've requested it, or doing busy work that we don't need to do. So really helping people delegate or drop the stuff that's not massively important is the first step in that.
So looking at how this is a big question, but looking at how organisations organise themselves, if you have this culture which is based on quite a lot of people being quite overwhelmed, everybody being very busy, probably some big changes in the marketplace, that, in my experience, generates a culture of, as you say, lots of reporting, lots of producing documentation to support things. It's that classic, you've got a meeting at 2 o'clock on a Monday for an hour, and you spend pretty much all the Sunday afternoon preparing for it, your 70 slides, because you're worried. Your feeling of overwhelm leads you to try and control the outcome of that meeting. Almost the more overwhelmed you feel, the more work you feel you need to do in order to feel comfortable. And that's quite a big organisational issue, because as I see somebody doing their presentation with 70 slides and looking really on it, well, I don't want to go into my meeting unprepared and be accused of, or kind of seen as kind of not taking something seriously enough, or having done the appropriate amount of preparation. And that's just one of many things that happens. We get stuff with budgets, how money's used, and so on. So, and I know that part of your work is saying it's not enough just to make individuals resilient. That's a really important part, but it's also making the company they work in, the environment they work in, such that good people don't burn out. Talk about some of the things that organisations can do or should be considering.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is this whole thing around meetings, because some organisations I'm working in, people spend like 30 hours a week in meetings. That leaves 7 hours a week to actually do the stuff.
Except it's fine because you've got all the evenings.
Yeah, and the weekends and all nights. So fine, isn't it?
Really, really early in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's great because you've done 5 hours work by 9 a.m. And so people have been saying to me, look, the problem is because we're so in meetings so much, we never prepare for the meetings and we never have agendas. And actually the meetings are sort of where we get the work done. And half the time they're sat in meetings that they don't need to be in because they've just had to go to give some information, or they're worried about something going on in the meeting and missing out on stuff. So I think spending some time as an organisation looking at your meetings culture and your meetings etiquette and how you're using your meetings, I think would go a long way. And I know that you're doing lots of work around that. I just think that is massively, massively needed. I think teaching people to coach themselves or coach each other, so to have these, not rely on their managers for so much.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because, actually managers are just people that have been maybe there a bit longer, been promoted, had a bit more experience, but actually we've all got experience. We all know what the answers are. And there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge within your peers and your co-workers.
And it's your peer, it's the person you sit next to, or in my case, the person who sits opposite me. We say, shall we go and get a quick cup of tea? We go and do that. It takes 5 minutes. And in that time, we probably talked a bit about her morning and a bit about my morning. And unlocked a couple of things, and then we're done. We've not had to book anything in anybody's diary. Yeah. So it's trying to empower your teams to be proactive, to go and have those conversations with each other, and then almost come to the manager as a last resort. So I think having organisations setting up sort of you can do official peer coaching groups, but actually I do think those informal conversations with each other can be really transformative, and giving people permission to do that. I was in a I think it was a law firm once, and they'd just gone completely open plan. And I know most open plan offices are really buzzy and people are talking, but in this one they weren't allowed to speak around the coffee machine anymore because it was disturbing everybody.
So there was no conversation with anyone at work. So not only was that really bad for their well-being in terms of connecting with each other, but they weren't able to have any conversations about anything. It just, I think, completely killed productivity and creativity. It was very difficult. So I think having an organisational culture which actually not just encourages people to informally interact, but actually promotes, teaches them how to do that, and almost the managers, when someone comes to them with a problem, saying, what's the team said first of all? Actually, go to the team first, then come to me, because actually you'll probably get most of what you need from the team rather than asking me.
And it sounds like that's the opposite of what often happens, which is you go for a cup of tea, you spend a bit too long having it because you're so fed up with your work, and you basically just have a rant about how annoyed you are with your manager or whatever. And I go on a lot of my evenings with friends who work in organisations rather than for themselves. Often a big part of that evening is taken up with everybody agreeing how awful each other's bosses are. Well, that sounds absolutely terrible. She sounds like a terrible leader. So we have this kind of sense of criticising the people around us. But if we could develop skills that would support each other better and coach each other, that would create a virtuous circle.
Yeah. And I've seen this happen. I was running some resilience training, and then we had the managers, lots of managers that work within the same team who had the same boss, and then they had teams that they work with, and we got them together for a group coaching session, and they would bring their own dilemmas. I've got this going on and I'm not quite sure what to do, and they'd say, and then the other people in the group would go, well, okay, have you, what are you, being a rescuer here rather than a coach? What are you doing here? They coached each other, and by the end of it, they had completely found the solution to their problems by themselves, just with other people asking them questions. And they went on to form I think they had a resiliency lunch every month where they just meet up as a team of managers to support each other. And it really transformed the way they were working. And that was without any input from their senior managers at all. They could do it themselves.
So I think you and I know each other quite well. I think you're really good at this. You always naturally look for solutions. You're hugely empathetic, and you're always asking questions around tell me more about that, or how, what are the options? And so you're always opening up options. For a lot of people, that's not their natural state. Now, I have a belief that if the human need will get met one way or another. So my work, as you know, is in meetings, a lot of it. And my belief is if the human need doesn't get met in the meeting, the organisation will pay for it somehow. So it will be vented in a private conversation by the coffee machine, or it will be that need will get met by leaving a bit early, or working from home and actually doing, thinking, while I'm here, I'm going to get the washing done and a few other things because the organisation doesn't do anything for me. That one way or another, that bill will get paid, and therefore, how much better to meet that need effectively and productively, and probably allow a little bit more time to do that. So, whereas a lot of people, I think, feel that meetings should be shorter and shorter, and certainly there are some meetings that should be shorter. Some meetings, I think, don't allow enough space for people to fully be heard and needs to fully be met. So for those people who aren't natural problem solvers like you, or for whom that doesn't feel like the best option for them, doesn't serve them, how can an organisation build a culture of coaching each other rather than agreeing that something's bad and wrong?
I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of time. I think because these sorts of conversations actually do take a bit more time than the very quick whingy by the coffee and then back to work. I think coaching is a skill, so people can learn it, and it always, in the courses that I deliver, people really love the bit about coaching, and I send them off to have coaching conversations with each other, they always look a bit, when they get off, what's going on? And they come back at the end of the day. I say, what was the best bit of the day? And they, it was that coaching conversation I had with so-and-so. You know, it wasn't anything it wasn't anything I taught them. It was all about what the coaching conversations that they'd had. And I think it's a skill, you just need to practice it, actually. So some basic training on how to have these conversations, I think, would go an awful long way. And when I do leadership courses for GPs, and I give them 45 minutes on how to coach, and I say to them, if you take away nothing else from today, just take away the question, what have you already tried, or what could you do about it? You know, what could you do, rather than immediately giving advice.
Yeah.
Or, you know, because as human beings, we really want to fix things for people. We really want to show our empathy and support by just giving them loads and tons and tons of advice. But that's rarely the answer for people. And just giving people the time and the space to talk out loud, because actually listening has a lovely quote from Nancy Klein, who wrote a book called, oh, it's completely gone out of my head. Time to think, absolutely. And she just said, the quality of my listening determines the quality of your thinking. I think that's so true. If someone just sits there and goes, tell me about it, so the person will often talk themselves round to the right solution. You know, you'll have a rant and you'll finish your rant about something. You go, you know, actually, they were probably just meaning this. And, yeah, I've reacted a bit badly, haven't I? And then if the other person was going, oh, yeah, no, don't worry. If the other person just said, so what could you do now? What would be the best, most helpful thing for you to do? Well, that would then go, oh yeah, yes, okay, I could do this. I'll probably just go and talk to them about it and do this. You'll come up with your own thing. So it's not difficult to teach people to coach. They just need a bit of practice. So I think, first of all, a little bit of basic training, and then giving the time each week and encouraging people to have those informal meetups where they can have those coaching conversations. And if the organisation wanted to do more, they could put in peer coaching groups, and, you know, have some people trained to a little bit of a higher level to then facilitate those things. And I think that would just start to transform all the conversations that were being had, not just the couple amongst the coaches, etc., etc.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, great skill, easy bit.
Yep.
In 45 minutes, you can teach people the skills that allow them to have sufficient foundation to build on and learn and practice. Harder question is the will. So when you've been under pressure for a long time, you build up a sense of resentment towards the organisation, and the idea, I can just think of a few organisations at the moment, the idea that you could go in and say, actually, everybody, I know it's been really awful for the last few years, but to solve, you know, and I know you probably feel like that's all our fault, but to go and solve that, you're going to need to find the time to coach each other. And look, it's really easy and it's fantastic. And I can see a lot of people saying, well, screw you. You know, you broke it, you fix it. I'm not giving up my time to do it. So how, and ultimately as humans, we have this kind of desire often to hold on to resentment and to make somebody else responsible. I remember you saying something to me around, that's like having rats and then eating the rat poison yourself.
Yeah. Holding a grudge against someone else, like drinking rat poison yourself to kill the rats. Yeah.
And nevertheless, we all do that to a certain extent, and breaking out of that resentment, like, how can an organisation get around that? Find a way to
I think there's it's tricky. I think that if you've got to the stage where there's all this resentment to the organisation, you're going to have to do quite a lot of listening, first of all, as the organisation, and let people just get it out and have a bit of a rant. And then I think I would be trying to talk to people about control. And the Stephen Covey talks about the circle of control in people's lives. So imagine, you know, your whole life is this massive circle, and the bit that you can control is that much in the circle. Okay, so I can control what I ate for breakfast. I can't control what my children ate for breakfast, but I can influence it by making sure I haven't bought Frosties and other things that are packed full of sugar. So I have more influence over stuff than I have control over. Now, a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to control stuff we absolutely have no control over. And that makes us really, really stressed. And so a lot of the time, it might not be right. It might not be the right thing that the organisation hasn't supported us and they're making all these demands of us. But it's what is. It's there. And we can't change that by being stressed about it and being cross about it. But what we can do is take control over the things we want to take control, that we can. So actually, what I do have control over is whether I choose to work in this organisation or not. At the extreme, ooh la la.
Yeah.
If it's that bad,
yeah.
If it's that bad, I have control over being able to go and work somewhere else.
Yeah. Would any of us stay in it? Well, many of us, we do stay in abusive relationships, but if we feel genuinely that we're being abused by the organisation, then we have free choice to leave. It may not feel like it.
Yeah. It's hard. If we then choose to stay, we can then choose we can then look at what we can control. We can control our own behaviour for a start. We can control what we say and what we do. We can't control what other people say and they do, but we can start to influence that. So I would then be starting to think about, for myself and for my team, actually, what is it that we can influence that would make a positive difference that we can do? Because we could choose to focus on all that stuff we can't control and how bad the organisation is, or we can choose to start to influence the things we can influence. What are those? Let's make a list. Let's decide how we make things better for ourselves. And there are some really easy ways to do that, often that people have overlooked, just communication and meetings and emails. And actually, do I know what my role is in this organisation? Have I sat down with my manager and set my priorities, worked out exactly what I should be doing for myself? Because maybe my stress is I'm trying to do someone else's job for them when actually I can't do that. So, I mean, I remember when I was working somewhere else, I was getting incredibly stressed and going, why aren't they giving me resources to do this? And I want to do this. And so my mentor just sat me down and said, Rachel, do you have any control over those resources? No, I don't. What can you do with the resources you've got? Well, I can do this, this and that. Great. So do that. Yeah. Forget about the other stuff that you've got no control over. And I felt like a weight that completely lifted off my shoulders. And then I guess if you're in an organisation that's asking you to do a lot and you genuinely can't do it with what you've got, that's when you then need to have a very honest and open conversation with your manager and say, this is what I've got, this is what I can do, this is what I'm concerned about. And then have that very adult to adult conversation about which choices are we going to make, rather than, I think sometimes what we can do is slip into the parent-child interaction, whereas I'm going to be the child, you're the parent, you told me to do that, I don't want to do it, type thing.
Yes, yeah. And let's acknowledge that there'll be many people watching this who, for example, work for the NHS. So for any overseas listeners, the NHS is our free National Health Service, and for the kind of many thousands of people who work there, that is what they are trained to do. That is the organisation that they care about. They don't want to leave, and the options for just leaving are not as easy and obvious as they would be for those people who work in IT, for example, or in banking. So final question: how can we, for managers and teams, how can we enable people to thrive in the 9 to 5 they're in right now, that very imperfect place that people care about?
So you've got to look at it from both angles, from what can your organisation do, what can you personally do. Personally, I can choose to keep myself well, physically and mentally well. I can make sure I'm active, I'm getting enough sleep, I'm eating okay, I'm connecting with people who give me energy, I'm doing all those things, I'm feeling grateful, I'm noticing my surroundings, I'm giving to others. All those things will keep me mentally, physically well. So that's one thing. I can make sure I've got the skills that I need to do my job. So quite a lot of the time it's about being proactive and working out what training I need to do, what courses I need to go on, so I'm not feeling exposed. I'm not doing stuff that I feel I really can't do. I think managing my reaction, my own reaction to things, and working out, when I'm being triggered, when my amygdala's firing off, and I'm in that fight or flight zone, I'm being able to recognise that and then change my reaction by thinking, what story's in my head, what story's in their head, what's actually the truth here, and how would I like to respond? Really, really important, and I think that's really important for minimising stress, and then also working out, what can I control? What's under my control? Brilliant, control it. What could I influence that I'm not influencing?
Yeah.
Brilliant, go and do that. And I think for me, when I coach people, that is the area that tends to be the real element, that there are things that they could influence, they just haven't tried yet. But also, what is outside of my control that I'm wasting all this energy and time on that I'm never going to change? So that's the personal stuff. For organisations, they really need to think about how they can get the teams to be able to spend more time together to have those transformational conversations.
Yeah.
How they can train the managers to be able to support their teams for resilience and well-being and productivity by having those conversations about well-being, about time management, about prioritising, because managers are brilliantly placed to be able to do that. And then to be able to remove those things that just cause a lot of stress and friction at work. For example, bad communication. For example, decisions being made that people have had no say in or no input in, or don't understand because they just haven't been explained properly. To make sure that there is a good career progression for people, so people don't feel that they're just stuck in a sort of dead end job. And all sorts of other things, to give people a little bit more control over their own work environment, over their own working hours, over their own projects even. The more control you can give to people over their own work, the less stressed people will be and the more empowered they will be. And I think as an overarching thing, having this understanding of the way we all get into these big dramas, the drama triangle, and we start to take the victim mentality that I can't change anything, I can't do anything, and then managers feeling they've got to rescue those people, and then the organisation being the big bad wolf who's making these unrealistic demands. That is just not a healthy triangle. It's called the drama triangle. But helping people step out of that and think, actually, I'm not a victim, I have control, I can do stuff. The managers, they're not there to rescue people, they're there to empower people to help themselves. And the organisation, they're not big and bad, they have challenges that they have to put to people, but how can they do that in a way that's respectful, that's empowering, that is, and helping people's potential, etc., etc. And I think one of the best ways in doing that is to train people to have really empowering conversations.
Dr. Rachel Morris, thank you so much. If people want to follow your work and see more about what you do, and read more of the stories of people in the same situation, where should they go?
So several places. They can find me on LinkedIn at Dr. Rachel Morris. My website is www.wildmonday.co.uk. I'm on Twitter. I think hopefully they'll be able to find me through One Fish, Two Fish if they get in contact with you. And I'd just love to start a conversation with anyone who wants to talk about resilience within the workplace.
Wonderful. Rachel, thank you so much. You've been listening to the One Fish Comms friction-free webinar series, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Many thanks.
Thank you.